Hi, this is Dr. Patmos. It is April the 18th, and I've got a video for you on a topic I've wanted to talk about for a while, but it took a little time to prepare for this. But today I'm going to address the issue of medical freedom and vaccine mandates. And I think if you follow this topic, you know that medical freedom is on a roll. Everybody seems to have just accepted the argument that, my body, my choice. No one can tell me ever that I have to be vaccinated or even have other medical interventions. This is a matter of autonomy, personal autonomy, and that there's no role for medical mandates or vaccination mandates. And in fact, around the country now, in many locations, vaccination mandates are being rolled back and dismantled. In Florida, for example, Governor DeSantis is actively uh, uh, promoting legislation that rolls back mandates. His attorney general, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, has made a passionate argument that vaccination mandates are immoral. It's akin to Nazism. That's what he said. Many other politicians, including Trump and Robert Kennedy, have railed against vaccine mandates under the aegis of medical freedom. And most of the doctors who've been appointed by Trump and Kennedy, including Dr. Bhattacharya, Dr. Prasad, Dr. Malone, um, and others, have very much supported the idea of medical freedom and opposed vaccine mandates. Dr. Malone, in particular, has been very, um, persuasive in his argument that it's unethical to have vaccine mandates and that we must have choice. And he has made famous the statement: if there is risk, there must be choice. Well, I have another interpretation of this. And if you read the text below, it's very well thought out. And let me tell you why there are times when medical mandates, and including vaccination mandates, are not only um, legally defensible, they are morally and ethically defensible. And let me give you a perfect example why. Vaccination is not purely a personal decision. When you get vaccinated, it's not just about you. You take a vaccine because the vaccine reduces your risk of death or severe disease, but it also reduces your risk of serving as a host reservoir, maintaining, perpetuating a pathogen, replicating it, reproducing it, mutating it into a potentially more deadly pathogen, and then spreading it to others who are vulnerable. Now, you may say, well, if everybody's vaccinated, then they're not vulnerable. But wait a second, there are lots of people who can't be vaccinated and who are sitting ducks. For example, babies who are too young for vaccination. You and your measles might infect and kill a baby that cannot be vaccinated due to its age. People who are immunocompromised with certain diseases where they are vulnerable. People who have cancer who are for that reason immunocompromised. People who are pregnant. There are lots of instances of groups of people that are put at risk when others who should be vaccinated refuse to be vaccinated. So it's not purely a matter of your own personal choice. Your decision to vaccinate or not be vaccinated clearly impacts others. And when it does so in significant ways and it puts others at risk, then there is an argument to be made for requiring vaccination. And that principle has been upheld repeatedly by the Supreme Court of the United States, going all the way back 100 years ago to Jacobson versus Massachusetts, where the Supreme Court ruled that the state, in its police power, um, where the state, in its police power, um, has the authority to mandate vaccination. And that was found by the Supreme Court and has been upheld repeatedly. Another example is in the situation with regard to um, abortion. Having a baby has risk. And so uh, people have argued around medical freedom around abortion extensively. So, my point today is that despite all of the traction that the medical freedom movement has gotten in the press and the strong support of people like Dr. Malone and Dr. McCullough, who have positioned themselves as ethically superior because they promote medical freedom, they miss the basic argument that actually no, um, vaccination is not about you entirely; it's about others as well, and you do not have the right to infect and kill others. And if you are adamant about not being vaccinated, then, or let's say in the case of tuberculosis, let's say you had active tuberculosis, the law is very clear. Either you get treated for active TB, and if you don't want to be, you refuse to take the medications, then guess what? You're quarantined until you are no longer infectious. That was the basis of the TB sanitariums that we had in the past. But since the 1950s, we've had effective treatment for TB, so sanitariums don't exist anymore. But there was a time where if you had TB and you refused treatment, you were picked up against your will and taken to a TB sanitarium where you were kept until your TB went into a remission state or you expired. Anybody remember the case of Typhoid Mary? Typhoid Mary had typhoid. There was no real treatment at the time. She was chronically infected. So she was quarantined and kept in medical quarantine and isolation for her entire life. That is defensible and legally defensible, morally and ethically defensible because her disease she could spread to others and kill others. There are many examples. Leper colonies, for those of you who remember leprosy in the island of Molokai, which was a leper colony 100 years ago. When there are diseases that are spread and affect others, you don't have the right to do that. And medical freedom as an ethical argument does not give you the right to harm others. Medical freedom has limits. Now, look, I understand nobody likes mandates, and we wouldn't need mandates if people were smart enough to get vaccinated. And in a lot of other countries, like for example, in Scandinavian countries, they don't have to mandate vaccinations because the population is really smart. Number one, and number two, they have universal health care where vaccines are free and available and given regularly. So they attain 95% vaccination levels without being mandated. If we were that smart, then we wouldn't need mandates. But unfortunately, Americans are not that smart. And we're seeing vaccination rates plummeting all across the country, which is coinciding with, and actually the reason more than coinciding with it is driving the increase in infectious diseases that we're now seeing. We now have thousands of cases of measles in the country. All these infectious diseases are making a comeback. And what we're going to see is the return of preventable contagious infectious diseases leading to harm in groups that are vulnerable because of people who in turn refuse to be vaccinated. So, I think what's going to happen, right now, I don't think we're going to see any vaccine mandates. It's just not politically something that can be sold right now in this climate. The medical freedom argument has gotten a lot of traction and is pretty strong right now. And I don't see public opinion at this point embracing vaccination mandates. Um, so, and I don't think that with the misinformation that's out there that we will voluntarily get to 95%. But we'll get to 95% eventually, and here's how it will happen. The pathogens will win in the long run. When people start seeing in large numbers their children choking to death of diphtheria, the strangling angel of diphtheria, when people start seeing their children paralyzed in an iron lung, when people start seeing their loved ones dying of preventable contagious infectious diseases, then the demand for vaccination will return. It'll be like it was in the 50s. I remember the 1950s. I was among the first children in the United States to be vaccinated against polio, and I can tell you how we viewed that vaccination back then. It was a celebration. Every young mother's worst nightmare in 1952 was that their child would get measles and be paralyzed for life or end up in an iron lung. And when the polio vaccine came out, um, it was a celebration. People were grateful. We lined up to be vaccinated. We were happy to get vaccinated. Thank God for Jonas Salk and the polio vaccine and all the other vaccines that came out. That was the mindset back in the 1950s. We'll get back there eventually, but what it will take is when parents start seeing their children dropping like flies from preventable contagious infectious diseases, then they'll realize the extent and depth of the misinformation and disinformation that they've been fed by the medical freedom movement and by the anti-vaxxers. It will come in time. It may take a few years or a decade or so, but eventually people will realize why we had vaccination mandates, and they're going to learn the hard way. But my point is that vaccination mandates are not morally reprehensible. In fact, they are ethically, morally, and legally defensible. They should be limited and restricted to those situations where they're necessary. We don't want unnecessary mandates. But if people aren't smart enough to vaccinate and reach 95%, then we'll get to 95% one way or another. We'll get there either with mandates, or we'll get there with people start embracing vaccination, or we'll get there when they start seeing their children falling and dropping like flies, which is just around the corner.